Thank you very much for coming, especially as Sally said, on such a miserable day. I'm going to tell you, I am sharing with you the sum total of what I've learned in the last year and a half, 2 years, and I'm humbled by what I don't know, and I'm sure what I do know will be fairly evident when we're done. I'm shocked by how much we have been manipulated again, and you'll learn what I'm talking about as I go through my presentation. This presentation is going to be online if anyone cares to look at it again or reference it. I have a website. I teach at Cambridge Graduate University these days, so without further ado, I'm going to ask my wife, Regine, to help. Just flash up who I am. I've served as a chief healthcare economist for the state of Florida, chief damage witness on the tobacco lawsuit. For 2 decades plus, I was Florida's chief environmental economist. And what else did I do? Headed up the Center for Economic Forecasting Analysis. So I've got a big background, a large background in environmental, healthcare, transportation, and of course macro, micro, statistics, all those other kinds of things that we economists love to talk about and do. As an example, the tobacco research, we scored $11.3 billion measuring. And this was due to not just my efforts, obviously, but in the damage estimate side, there was also Dr. Richard Hopkins, who is a good friend and colleague, a medical doctor and the state's former epidemiologist, and Dr. Fred Roberson. Ann is here. Her husband helped us with the calculations, and thanks to Lawton Childs, we were able to secure, and then we got another $3 billion on top of that. We measured the economic damage that smoking does to Medicaid clients that we, the state of Florida, pay for. So we got this money back, and they're still paying, I might add, and that money is being used for a lot of things. Originally, it was intended predominantly to be money used only for children's health. But anyway, you know what politics is, okay? And so, well, I also got a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation fund. These are just examples of tobacco. It was a $100,000 grant to look at smoking-related nursing home expenditures in Florida. And to show you how flaky this stuff is, how flaky research can be, I was essentially trying to divine the dead people that had already passed away by and large, ask them or their families how much they smoked. And we were able to capture enough information to estimate that, in fact, smoking does not create higher costs in nursing homes. Guess what? They die earlier. And it was a shock to learn that. I was disappointed, but it causes recidivism too. Okay. So got some publications out of it in medical journals. And so, as you might guess by now, I know a good bit about how the tobacco industry has messed with our minds and our children's minds, along with other big corporations. So what I've started doing is doing an educational series for children, middle school kids specifically. Mumford Middle School, I prepared a set of lectures for kids, asking them, my son was the teacher, Thomas Lynch, invited me in, and I'm hoping to expand this to other parts of the Leon County community. What are Big Agg doing to you, the kids? And they're turning you upside down and shaking you upside down and getting all the money out of you and your parents, and they don't give a damn about your health. McDonald's, all these others. So what I would tell them, and these are the same things I'm hoping to share with you, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell it to you, then I'm going to tell you what it is I told you. And I expected the kids to be able to make better decisions on health, improve their wellness, to recognize big tobacco and big fast food companies want to make profits with no interest in their health. And it's the same message I'm sharing with you today, but you're the big kids. So this is part of what I shared with them, no nutritional value. And this is what you should be doing when you see Ronald McDonald. That's the smartest kid on the planet. This is what McDonald's actually doing to you. When the kids see these things, they go, "Oh, gross!" This is Ronald McDonald in his finest form. And so this is what McDonald's is actually about, not the Happy Meal. I used to buy Happy Meals for my kids. And McDonald's employees are told on the McDonald's website not to eat their own food because it's dangerous to their health. Go figure. They don't want absenteeism among their own troops. So, and how can we compare when non-fast food gets only about $160 million a year, vegetables and fruits for advertising, compared to the $4.6 billion that is spent by the fast food companies? That's part of what I share with the kids. And look at the size. When you and I were all kids, many of us, not all of you, that's what a Coke was. Here we are now, up to the maximum size possible for a human body to contain over a year, and it's all in one day. And there's free refills too, by the way.
And that's the size in France too.
Yeah, this is the size in France. My wife is French. We'll get to that later, how different France and the US are. But nonetheless, the kids are shocked by this, and the overlap of, guess what, per capita soda consumption and per capita diabetes. Shocking, right?
It's a coincidence.
Just coincidence. So I tell the kids that less than 1% of kids' meals combinations in restaurants are meeting nutritional standards recommended by experts. Of course, that means nothing to them. But meanwhile, this kind of makes a little more sense. These are the choices you have, junk food or not junk food. And it's surprising, actually, how many young kids, I'm talking middle school kids, 10, 12, 11, 13, know the message already, and things are starting to change because their moms are starting to understand. It's not me sharing it with them, it's the round world. So what about tobacco? Are you a man? Can your lungs take it, or are you a wuss? You need a respirator? You're not a man. Are you sexy enough? Are you hot enough? This is the latest vein on this whole thing about tobacco manipulation. They're going to get kids on vapor cigarettes, right? And guess what? It's chocolate, it's vanilla, and so this is the current vogue for, and I've got 200 more slides I'll share with the kids. At the end of the kid discussion, we're now into the adult world. So my wife has been a vegan since she was 20, I suppose 21, and I've been a semi-vegan. Semi-vegan? And so we went to a lovely cruise out of Miami, a 7-day cruise. It's all a vegan cruise called Holiday at Sea.
Holistic holiday.
Holistic holiday.
Holistic holiday. And we had 6 days of lectures from some of the most educated minds on the planet Earth. And they would only be talking to us about evidence-based science. Evidence-based science. The rest of it is all personal opinion. And you know what they say about opinions?
No, we don't.
It's like assholes. Everyone has one. So I changed my life because of this. Wait. Okay, so this is a gentleman that started the manipulation. He's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And in 1901, he was approached by, and you'll hear it from his own lips in just a moment, he was approached by the Beechnut Packing Company, which is a pork company, 1920s, and they said, we need to sell more pork. What can you do about that? So he got a doctor to say that Americans that were only eating oranges, fruit, and coffee and grain, perhaps bread, for breakfast, needed to eat a more dense diet, because you lose energy when you sleep at night, was his argument. So we got 5,000 more doctors to agree. It hit the press, and oh my God, all of a sudden this was the way America moved. When I grew up, my mother just passed, she was 98. I asked her, Mom, when you grew up, what did you eat? She said, well, cereal, of course, for breakfast, and maybe a piece of fruit. And that's when we go to France, it's called a continental breakfast. You all know what I'm talking about. The Europeans still don't eat this heavy breakfast with bacon and eggs. Where did this come from? So Bernays felt that he was the first to use psychology, and Bernays felt his manipulation of public opinion was necessary to avoid the dangerous, irrational herding instinct. And there may have been some basis to this. He actually saw what Hitler did, and he understood the power of this thing. He turned that around after World War II and helped other companies do other things that were profitable for them, not necessarily good for us. So he orchestrated a massive change in public opinion to make bacon and eggs all the American breakfast. This is him in his own words.
Excuse me.
What?
I'm trying to get you some volume here, Tim.
Yeah.
How's that?
I'm trying to get you some volume
Many years ago, our client was the Peach Net Packing Company. We made a research
you hear that?
and found out that the American public ate very light breakfasts of coffee, maybe a roll, and orange juice.
Can you all hear that in the back?
We went to our physician, found that a heavy breakfast is sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast because the body loses energy during the night and needs it during the day.
Who would have figured?
We asked the physician, after telling him why we were talking to him, would he be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his, confirmed his judgment. He said he would be glad to do it. We carried out a letter to 5,000 physicians. Obviously, all of them concurred that a heavy breakfast was better for the health of the American people.
Perfectly scientifically valid, right?
That was publicized in the newspapers. Newspapers throughout the country had headlines saying 4,500 physicians urge heavy breakfast in order to improve health of American people. Many of them stated that bacon and eggs should be embodied with the breakfast, and as a result, the sale of bacon went up, and I still have a letter from Bartlett Arkell, president of Beach Nut Packing Company, telling me so.
There you go. How can you argue with that, right? Okay, well, guess what? He was approached thereafter by the tobacco industry, 1929, at a time of intense movement of women's rights. And so women were considered social outcasts. In fact, they could go to prison for smoking publicly. Hey, that sounds right to me. So on March 31st, on the height of the Easter parade, a young woman, who happened to be his secretary, stepped from the crowd and lit a Lucky Strike cigarette and walked down the street in clear defiance of male rule. As a result, the press the next day, having been notified that she was going to do this, had the New York Times headlines, group of girls puff cigarettes as gesture of freedom. Power. So, Bernays proclaimed smoking was a form of liberation for women, and he had them light the freedom torch. And you can see in these advertisements, women all over the country followed, and it was very avant-garde, right, to smoke. Thanks, we didn't know that. So, among other things, I won't dwell on this, but he helped to organize an overthrow of the government in Guatemala, creating a better business climate for Chiquita banana. He hired by aluminum company to put fluoridation in the water. He was hired by Dixie Cup to make people think that glasses were unhealthy and paper cups were the way to go. Isn't this a great guy? I'm impressed. He was hired by the President Coolidge to run his campaign, and you can guess the rest of the story. Well, I think in the year 2000 something, this book by Michael Moss, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, Salt, Sugar, and Fat, was published. How many people have heard of this book? How many people have read it? Okay. He's my Pulitzer Prize. He was and maybe still is, I think, a New York Times correspondent, and he wrote brilliantly about this manipulation of the press. And after World War II, the food industry conspired to add salt, sugar, and fat into our diet, into every processed food on the planet. And they were seeking to achieve what they called the bliss point. And what can you guess that would be? The point of highest, so that you would walk away with wanting to buy more and not be able to have enough of this crap that we're eating put into your body. Cargill was the world's largest supplier of salt. Scientists are now seeking to change the physical shape and pulverize it so that more of the flavor is let go and it's absorbed more into your body. More salt in your body. Good idea. the sweetener companies are working with fructose additives to boost the allure of future foods, and they're now trying to amplify the sweetness of sugar 200 times of its natural strength. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? So the bliss point is this point where you haven't, it's not salty enough, and here it doesn't taste good, it's too salty. You want to be at this optimum point here where all of the brain parts that release these hormones in your brain, the feel-good stuff, is on overcharge. Does that sound like addiction? That's exactly what this is. It's addictive, and it's based on the molecular structure of the food. And so what we see is the CEO's greed in food science plus the bliss point is breaking America. Not just the spirit, but also the food health of our country, health system. But we've achieved the bliss point, and we're going further. So this is sometimes how I feel. What should I eat? Ever feel like this?
Yeah.
Eat me, nimble me, low fat, eat me, I'm free, and so forth. So on this cruise, oh yes, we learned that high fructose corn syrup. Anybody know what that is?
Oh, yes.
It was a chemical invented in Japan in the 50s. And it is cheaper than real sugar, and it is much sweeter than real sugar. And so as a result, our bodies over the last 2 million years of evolution have never had fructose, high fructose corn syrup. There's fructose in fruit, and that's a natural form. That's fine. Your body knows what to do with that. But when this high fructose, which is in everything we eat, hits your liver, the liver instantly turns it into fat.
Every processed food, not everything.
And it's in all processed food, correct. And so as a result, this fat creates the disease of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is when your liver shoots insulin into your bloodstream to enable it to go into the muscles and use it for energy and create reductions in the amount of insulin in your body, in your blood, because it's dangerous. Your liver doesn't see this insulin, this high fructose corn syrup, because of its molecular structure. So it turns it instantly into fat. And so this creates type 2 diabetes. Hence the reason we have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes across the planet. More in America than anywhere else.
John Ness.
And so, yeah, my good friend John Ness, who's my medical doctor, our medical doctor, but also a dear, dear friend. We have lunch every Wednesday together with Tom McCluskey and some other friends. Said to me, I said, John, this is towards good health. When you see people in your office that are looking at you and saying, this is my condition, my type 2 diabetes, my type 1 diabetes, I can't keep my weight under control, I can't do this and I can't do that, I can't. So why don't you tell them about this? He said, looking back, he said, you have no idea how many times I've looked across that space between me and my patients, and as I suggest this, they say they can't. They can't change their lives. And so he doesn't push it because that would shut them off, shut them down, as we know. Okay?
And that's 30 years ago.
And this was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, John said, and this was just yesterday when Tom and I were having lunch with him, he said, 30 years ago when I started practice, I would never see anyone with fatty liver condition. He said, now more than half of the people that I see have this condition. And he looked around the restaurant. We were just up the hill at Hopkins Eatery. He said, you can just look and tell who's got this condition. But it's a condition that is crippling our children as well as us, all of us. So here's high fructose corn syrup, much higher, sweeter level on the glycemic index than raw honey, of course, maple sugar, or even sucrose. So it's the highest punch you can get for these foods. So what's happened is that this is the line for high fructose corn syrup created in the 1950s, started to be used in the 60s, and it starts mounting, tripling its production at the peak, which was somewhere in the early 2000s. It started to decline a bit, but still is prolifically being used. And guess what else has climbed by 30%? Adult onset diabetes. It used to be adult onset diabetes, now it's just called type 2 diabetes, because so many kids have it.
It's a
We know this.
coincidence. It's a coincidence.
It's a coincidence, my wife says. Well, there you go. And sugar is hidden in all these different names, and it's hard to decide. It's hard for all of us to understand, what are we eating? What are we eating? What are we eating? So here we are, the progress. And now it's sugar body. Don't go so far.
It's there, the sugar.
Here we are again, and this is the result. It's an uphill climb and a backslide into this new link. Obesity, sugar diabetes, sugar consumption, these things are all going up at the same time. And as Regine points out, and I'll share with you later my own research, which is showing the strong, strong correlation between several different things, what we eat and our biometric measures. Correlation is not causation. When the, can you go back to that one? The one earlier? No, one more. No, one more. Yeah. When you look at things going up together, the tobacco industry was accosted by the Surgeon General, I think in the 1960s. 64. And there was a statistical association only between the mechanisms of smoking and lung cancer. But it wasn't proven. It was only statistically associated. Still enough to put that Surgeon General's warning on the side. Years later, they found the biological linkages by looking at smoke interaction with alveoli in the lungs. The biological proof was then there. Statistical evidence is suggestive and powerfully important, but not necessarily sufficient. So here's the growth in obesity and high fructose corn syrup. Just coincidence, right? Go back, please. I have to take this, I'm going to have to demote her. Here's added fat intake and obesity prevalence. That's no surprise. This is, but when you see the data, isn't it shocking? Go to now, please. And this is the thing that I think is most shocking, is that this is the prevalence of overweight folks in America. And we are more than 7 in 10 of us overweight. And you look at France, which was one of our parallels. They're, what, a factor of 1/3 of what we are. We have the blessing of living in France 3 months, 2 to 3 months a year. Regine's French, as I say, and we stay in France with her mother and family and our friends. And when we come back, it's a culture shock just looking around at our fellow Americans. And it's not a criticism. You're going to learn later, I'm going to share with you that evidently some 70% of our propensity to be overweight is genetically induced, genetically through epigenetics. And Ed and I were in this class together. We'll talk about this in a bit. But this is what we're passing through to our children. The propensity, not the condition, but the propensity. And it's not the DNA code, it's the epigenetics that I'll talk about in a bit. But look at the comparison between us and the rest of the world. The U.S. Army and military can't even find enough recruits that are reasonably close to being able to do what they need to do physically to be able to be in the military. And this is also the obesity, and as you can see, it's not just older people, us, me, and it's grown from what 10, 12%, 15% in the 70s, up to 30%, 33, 35% across the U.S. in all age categories, And guess what? I think I told you I served as Florida's chief environmental economist. When Fidel Castro took over Cuba, the Van Hoels and other Cubans came to Florida. They said, hey, we used to do sugar in Cuba. We can't do it anymore. We're going to do it here. They took over the Everglades, bought up pieces because they had money they brought, and they started with 6,000 acres of Everglades being used for sugar cane. Now there are 600,000. And we're paying twice the world market price, because of import quotas at the border. There are these little boats floating around from the Caribbean, Central America, and South America that want to sell us their sugar at half the price. We're only willing to pay twice as much because of the politics involved with sugar, big sugar, buying the politicians. Even Ronald Reagan, with as much power as he had, an arch conservative, wanted to do away with all agricultural subsidies. Forget it, he couldn't touch them. So that's the story there. Potential health and economic consequences of plant pure nation. How many people have seen Plant Pure Nation? Okay, 3 or
Forks
4.
over knives.
How many have seen Forks Over Knives? Okay. Do you all remember the guy in Forks Over Knives that did the China study? T. Colin Campbell. His son's name is Nelson Campbell, and we had the blessing of meeting both of those folks on the cruise, the 7-day cruise we went on. And Nelson started to create a product that he could sell, which he is now successfully. It's in Walmart. I mean, it's in Publix. Now, certain products that are whole plant food-based products that are prepackaged that make it easy for you to eat. Whole plant-based food. He took the lead from his father's video on Forks Over Knives and created a video of his own called Plant Pure Nation. And when I learned that he was doing this experiment with almost 100 people, he asked me if I would do the statistical analysis to look to see what are the results of the healthcare biometric measures, what are the effects of on the economy of eating a whole plant food-based diet for 10 days, just 10 days. Okay. So why don't we play that?
Microphone.
No way. So your total cholesterol was 176, and it went down to 139. Your LDL went from 84 to, I can't tell how much there is because there's less than 25. Really, yeah. I'm getting better than that. I'm pretty good. Triglycerides were 153, which was at risk, and they dropped to 66.
That kept me from getting the best life insurance rate that I could get. Triglycerides being high before, so that's.
Your LDL?
Average cholesterol fell from 196
That's Nelson.
to 148.5. LDL cholesterol went from 118 down to 86. Every single person here had significant improvement. The first jump start went really well, so we decided, well, let's see how far we can take this. And so we decided to do a second jump start. In organizing that jump start, I thought about someone who had participated in the first jump start, Aubrey Metter.
As I participated in that 10-day jump start, I saw great results for me. I realized that, this can have a significant impact on my health, and if it helps me this much, I'd love to bring this to our employees and see what it could do for our whole employee base.
This is an opportunity for you.
Okay, that was one of the groups that he captured. This is a second group.
I believe that food choices matter. But not only do our food choices matter when it comes to the cruel treatment of animals and to the degradation of our land, food choices also matter because food choices can directly impact our health for better or for worse. A few weeks ago, Nelson Campbell was invited to our Bible study. He had a radical proposal.
Radical proposal.
He said for 10 days, I put a whole plant food-based diet before you. I ask you to put it to the test. Those of us who tried the whole plant food-based diet for 10 days, we saw remarkable drops. Oh, y'all know right about it. Our cholesterol level, in our weight, and in our blood sugar levels. Those of us who tried this whole plant food-based diet for 10 days can testify which diet is better.
This is one of the parishioners in that church.
My favorite foods are fruits. And being on the plant-based diet, I can eat my fruits now without running my blood sugar numbers up out the sky. They started out, remember, at 340, 350. That's when I first started. Now I'm at 100, between 125, 130. Once I got back to the doctor's office to see my favorite doctor, we sitting there and she's talking, and I said, you need to be telling the other patients about it. Because if it helped me, it'll help them. She acted like she didn't hear me. She did. She acted like she didn't hear me.
I think physicians are scared they're really scared that patients are just going to eat fruits and vegetables and are not going to take their treatments. And that's not what we're saying, at least not what I'm saying.
So that woman that was speaking earlier, she said her doctor gave her medication that she didn't even open. And when the doctor checked her results, not knowing that she hadn't opened her medication, she said, "That's amazing, this medication is doing a great job."